Well, hey, how's it going? Like it was mentioned, my name is David. I'm the site pastor of Exeter, and I have the privilege of being on the teaching team. I'm praying and trusting that this gathering that you are partaking in is bringing a sense of peace and hope to your mind, heart, and soul that then allows you to walk out in the truths of Jesus. And a few weeks ago, we started a brand new series called By Faith, looking at Hebrews, a New Testament letter. And it's a beautiful moment to see looking into a letter of the chapter 11, I should say, specifically chapter 11. And it's called the Hall of Fame of Faith. And I've been reading these names in this chapter and wondering, wow, what would it look like to have a name of your own in a chapter that exemplifies people's bold faith and trusting in God? I've been reflecting on this for a little bit and reading through and really noticing and coming to a realization that reading a chapter like this can actually ignite your faith journey on your own as well. It's a source of inspiration as you reflect on other people's walk with God. It truly is. And when we witness the steadfastness of a human being realizing that they need God and trust in God and have faith in God, it displays to us that we too can have a flame lit inside of us to encourage all of us to have a faith that is in God. It's an experience of testimonies from other people that show us God's faithfulness and his grace to them, but also to us. And it reminds us that we too can overcome challenges and grow stronger in faith. I trust and pray that today's conversation will bring you hope. I truly do, because it's really been working and moving in my heart to understand what unwavering faith really looks like, where then you can open up these stories for yourselves and allow them to come to life in front of you like they've done for so many years to other people. Today, we're going to look at the story of Jacob from the Old Testament. And in Hebrews, it says this about Jacob. It says, by faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. Now, I need to state right off the hop and in the beginning of this message that today is going to slip in and out of teaching and preaching. For this message to really land well, it's important to do the teaching side or the exegetical work to allow it to help us bring the context to the forefront of our minds and our hearts to understand what is happening here. And then near the end, I'm going to speak into the heart, which is the preaching side, because I believe Jacob's story can move all of us in steps of faith. See, Jacob's story is found in the book of Genesis, and it's a total of 25 chapters. It starts in 25 and ends in chapter 50. And let me tell you this, I wrestled as I sat down to write this message, because how do you cover 25 chapters in 30 minutes? Sometimes I would say like, hey, let's do 35, but the production team says, no, you've got 30. So how do I cover 25 chapters in 30 minutes? To figure this out, I decided, you know what, I'm going to read all 25 chapters. And something began to happen inside of me as I was reading this story. I saw the story of humanity come to life in this moment through the faith of Jacob. See, we all navigate the twists and turns of life differently, right? We explore ways to control our lives. We try to step into moments that are going to help us transform into being human beings that God's created us. Sometimes we step into the things of God. Sometimes we step out of his alignment and we try to take control. And we have found ways how to make life work for ourselves, because we're designed to be creative human beings, talented beings. And when reading this story and allowing my mind to really fully immerse inside of it, I saw humanity and I saw myself and many others sit into this moment and understand that Jacob is very much like you and I. Because today we're going to navigate the twists and the turns of Jacob's life, exploring his transformation from a cunning trickster to a man blessed by God. We're going to look at the complexities of faith, wrestling with doubts and struggles and emerging with a profound connection. Even though he struggled, there was a connection to God and his plan in his life. Jacob's journey challenges us to confront our struggles, reminding us that through faith, transformation is not only possible, but is truly profound as we lean into faith. And I want to open up 3 moments within these 25 chapters of Jacob's life, because I believe these 3 moments out of the 25 can actually help us understand that we too can be faithful like Jacob, but also see God be the one who is truly faithful. So the first moment in Jacob's life is a 2-for-1, okay? I couldn't split them apart. They really are intertwined together, and it's the moment of the birthright and the blessing of Jacob. It says this in Genesis chapter 25, verse 21 to 23. This is before the birth of Jacob and his brother Esau. It says that Isaac, the dad, prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is thus, why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided, and one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger." In this moment, Rebekah has finally conceived children, and she has a horrible twin pregnancy. The babies are described as they struggled with one another. And other translations says they smashed together inside the mother's womb. And this battle within the womb was actually foreshadowing the lifelong struggle between them on this side of birth. And this struggle has her inquire of the Lord, "Why is this happening to me?" Maybe moms say this all the time. "I've never been a mom, and I won't be able to be a mom." And the Lord reveals to her as she questions these things and says, "There's two nations inside of you, and the older shall serve the younger." Now, culturally in this moment, the context of the time was this, that definitely would never happen. The older one, the firstborn, would always gain all of the birthright. They would gain the keys to the family kingdom and all the blessing that the family had. The second, the youngest, would just be part of that life. And as they were born, it was true that it never ended the struggle. Esau came out first, and Jacob came out second, clutching his brother's heel on the way out second. Esau, as he was born, the older one, was described as red and hairy, which would actually foreshadow that he would be a hunter and a skillful one. Jacob, scholars suggest that his name meant he who is God rewards or protects. But here in the Old Testament, often what happens with the traditional name, it's given new meaning as they live out their life. Jacob is actually linked to the word heel in this moment because he was clutching his brother's heel, and is probably understood to mean that he clutches at that heel, which exemplifies the life of grasping and being a cheating competitor. Though two twins, right, the characteristics of them developed quite differently. Jacob became a cool, collected, stay-at-home son, is described as one that dwells in tents. Esau became an active countryman, described as a skillful hunter and a man of the field. And one day, Jacob exploits his brother's humanness, Esau, and took advantage of him and his birthright. So here we see that Esau was born first, but the prophetic word from the Lord to Rebekah says that the younger will be over top of the older, and the older will serve the younger. And in this moment, we get transitioned into Genesis chapter 25, verse 29 to 34 when it comes to the birthright. It says, "When Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, 'Let me eat some of the red stew, for I am exhausted.' Jacob said, 'Sell me your birthright.' Esau said, 'I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?' Jacob said, 'Swear to me now.' So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright." Now, in this moment, I need to say something regarding spiritual value when it comes to this birthright, and even speaks to other moments in our lives. When God places value upon something or someone, it's going to reveal two things: himself and his plan. And there's something unfortunate that happens to spiritual value sometimes. When spiritual value is in the hands of man, it can sometimes fall short, or the ball can be dropped, and it can be misused. And sometimes when it's handled by man, some handle it with content. They really never see value in it. Others hold high value and end up actually manipulating it, doing the opposite of being content. And Esau and Jacob exemplify these two examples. Esau in this moment is overcome by physical appetite. He's the firstborn. And in this day and age, he was going to receive all the keys to the kingdom of his family and the blessing, but he's overcome by a physical appetite where he sees no value for his life or his call of being the firstborn. Jacob, the heel grabber, is a cunning trickster and takes the birthright from Esau. This really is not a righteous move. I'll have to be very clear. Don't be doing this to people as a follower of Jesus, because he's looking out for himself, his fleshly desires. But what we do see here in this moment is that Jacob is moved to something that actually has value, and he was willing to actually go for it. Even though his brother didn't see the value, he was willing to go for it. So in this trade, Esau gets the stew, which was really no value. It's just a hit of satisfaction to the physical appetite. And Jacob receives the birthright and gains all the value. Though Jacob was a quiet man and recognized the spiritual value, he did it wrongfully. And God, in this story, as you read it for yourself fully, you would see that he reveals to him that the promises that he has for his people aren't acquired this way. And there's a lesson here for us. Don't sacrifice spiritual provision and value to satisfy personal needs. Jacob craved something worth craving for in his life. He wanted God. He truly did. And believers should never seek things for spiritual value that are not of God. Believers should seek the spiritual value that's from God, but avoid the costs and the devices of the flesh. Esau let the flesh move him in weakness, and Jacob allowed the flesh to manipulate a moment for personal gain. Now, here's the thing. Jacob wasn't done being a cunning, craving more trickster. He actually ended up stealing the blessing from his brother. Now, we don't have time to actually open this completely up, but you can find this in Genesis 27. Here's the Cole's notes. Because the father Isaac of Jacob and Esau is calling for his son Esau to come to bless him, because he was coming to an end of his time, of his life, where he's actually blind. So he calls upon Esau, and in this moment, we find a gripping and morally complex story in the Bible. Isaac, old, nearly blind, end of life, calls for his son Esau to bless him before he dies, and Rebekah, his wife, overhears this, and favoring her son Jacob, the stay-at-home mama's boy in this moment, quickly devises a plan to deceive Isaac, her husband, where she instructs Jacob to disguise himself as Esau by wearing his brother's clothes, covering his hands and his neck and his body with goat skin to mimic Esau. Remember, he was red and hairy. Scholars actually would say that he was probably more animal-like than actually human. And Jacob, in this moment, with his mother, successfully deceives Isaac, and then Isaac gives him this irrevocable blessing intended for Esau. And this blessing that Isaac speaks over his son involves prosperity, dominance, and divine favor, critical elements for the future of Jacob's descendants. Esau then comes into the moment and returns, ready for the blessing from his dad, and he is devastated by the trickery of his brother. He begs his dad for a blessing, but Isaac can only be bound to a word to give Esau a secondary blessing, because word and blessing was worth value and much, much more than anything else. So his word, he could only give him a secondary one, which predicts a harder life where he would end up actually serving Jacob. Isaac continues the blessing of Jacob and calls for him again and says, "The God Almighty that was with me is now with you, and you need to go, leave, be fruitful and multiply God's family." And Jacob listens, and he's set off. This story underscores a critical theological point. God's plan and mercies prevail despite human flaws. God uses Jacob, yes, a deeply flawed individual, to fulfill his divine purpose. And the blessing Isaac gave Jacob foretells the future dominance of Israel, God's people, over others, and the continuation of God's covenant promises through Jacob's lineage. Ultimately, Jacob's story is a testament to God's unmerited favor no matter what. It reminds us that God's grace and sovereignty work through our weaknesses and in our failures, pointing to a hope that rests not in human merit or human flaws, but in the mercy and the providence of God's blessing and protection over someone's life if he wants and so chooses to use them. That's the first one, 2 for 1, the birthright and the blessing. We see Jacob be this conniving trickster to steal both of those things from Esau, but God still uses him. The next moment actually is a beautiful moment as well. And it helps us understand that on the way of Jacob's faith, he's being shaped and molded into the man God desires him to be. And there's a moment in Genesis 28 where he wrestles with God with a dream. And he receives a dream from God and is caught in Genesis chapter 28, verses 12 to 17. It says this, "And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, to the east, to the north, to the south. And in you, your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed by. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to the land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Jacob's dream here in this moment, as he's growing in faith and God's dependence, is based on God's pure grace for man. God appeared to Jacob to assure him of his promise of blessing and protection, which then prompted Jacob in this moment to have a marvelous and beautiful worship response to God and vowing that he has loyalty to God and only to God in his life. And this passage in this story is helping to reveal two things and teaches us two things about Jacob's faith journey. The first one is that it answers the question, whether you and I are asking, is the Lord actually really the God of Jacob? Is he going to use a man that was conniving and trickster and trying to manipulate things for his own doing? And would he absolutely use Jacob to carry on the heritage and the legacy of God's people that started all the way back to Abraham, which we're going to talk about later on in this series? And the answer is yes, he is with Jacob. Through this dream, it reveals that. The other thing it reveals to us is that it shows Jacob's outlook of faith in life was dramatically changed in this moment through faith and wrestling with this dream from God. See, God's promise is to be with his people in a theme all throughout Scripture. And the example actually is that these are the very words that he told his dad Isaac before Isaac told him to go and multiply. Genesis chapter 26, it says, "I am the God of Abraham, your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and I will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake." God was saying this thing to Isaac. Isaac told Jacob to go, and Jacob receives this from God. It was God's presence bringing this moment together. And he was showing him, by grace, even though you are flawed, I will use you to reveal the promises and the protection and the provision to this world through my people to what? Bless others and go. Which then in turn, people with faith only respond to God. They give to God, they love God, they worship God, they offer to him, they make memorials of stories and to reflect on people's faith to help future worshipers and believers understand that it is only God that allows us to have the dependence and trust of faith in the one that created all. Then he says, "Go, reveal who I am." I hope you're catching what I'm picking up here. We've seen Jacob be a conniving trickster And now he's having a moment and a realization by faith in God that God is truly with him and he will fulfill the things that he needs to do in his life because he says, I will not leave you until I have done what I said I would do. Now, the final moment to wrap up this talk together is this realization that there can be healing and hope and reconciliation through the journey of faith. Genesis chapter 32 and 33 is this magnificent moment and look into the life of Jacob where he goes to his brother for a reunion and reconciliation. And it's not just an event that captures a family reconciliation, but it is a profound spiritual milestone for Jacob in his faith. Genesis chapter 32 verses 3 to 21 is where Jacob is on his way back home, fearing Esau's wrath for the past. And he actually sends messengers ahead with gifts to appease his brother. God has now called Jacob to go back home in this moment. And on the way back, he goes, I better send messengers. I better send gifts as a peace offering. And this act of gift sending indicates Jacob's fear, but also his hope to make peace with his brother because he is stemming from the deception that he had years ago. And Jacob's fear of Esau reflects his awareness and the consciousness and the spiritual maturity that his past actions have consequences. But the beautiful thing is there is a spiritual maturity that has finally grown inside of him over the years because of his faith and dependence on God. So he sends them to go. But before he gets to his brother Esau, there's a moment in Genesis 32, verses 22 to 33, that marks the moment the night before he sees Esau, and Jacob has a mysterious and transformative encounter. He's described that he is wrestling with a man, and it's later revealed that he is wrestling with God in the flesh. And the struggle symbolizes, and the wrestling match symbolizes Jacob's lifelong struggle with God and man, the divine in the flesh. Despite being injured in this moment, if you read it for yourself, he's injured. Jacob persists, demonstrating that he has tenacity and a desire for God's blessing. In faith, he has grown that the blessing is the most important thing in his life. And this event marks a significant transformation in Jacob's life. His name is actually changed to Israel. No longer called Jacob, now Israel, signifying his new blessing and his new identity for the mission and the vision under God's provision and call. It goes back to Genesis 28, where God says, I will be with you in that dream that he had of the ladder from earth to heaven. I am with you and I will fulfill the things that I've called on your life. So he has this dream. He finds faith to keep moving forward to his brother Esau, and it's captured the reunion in Genesis 33, verses 1 to 11. It's described like this. Jacob approaches his brother Esau with probably tension and uncertainty of what's going to happen, but he approaches with humility, bowing to the ground 7 times before his brother Esau. And to his surprise, Esau runs to meet him, embraces him, and they actually weep together. This reconciliation is a powerful testament, not just to forgiveness, but also to healing of past wounds and relationships. Esau's acceptance of Jacob's gifts symbolize his forgiveness, and Jacob acknowledges, yes, I've been forgiven, but I have stolen your blessing. And I've stolen your birthright, and these gifts, please take them and accept them as a blessing from me. I am a changed man. I'm not who I used to be. By faith, God has shaped me and molded me into a man that he desires me to be. Take these things. Esau receives them. See, this moment on the journey back to Esau is a journey of faith, and it highlights 3 significant, powerful growth characteristics within Jacob that lean into how do we have these for ourselves. The first one is the faith and dependence of God. Before meeting Esau, Jacob actually prays earnestly, acknowledging, God, I need you in this moment. My past failures and mistakes, there are consequences for these things, but I need your protection. I am praying that this reunion will go well. And this prayer marks and starks a contrast of his earlier reliance on his own cunning actions, making life work for himself. And here he is saying, God, I am in your hands. It's increased dependence on God during a moment of fear and uncertainty, but his faith held him true. Next, you see humility. Jacob's actions towards his brother is a genuine humility. A man that is bowing before his brother, used to steal and take away from his brother, is now offering abundant gifts of blessing. I am sorry. Bowing before his brother is a gesture of respect, highlighting that his heart has changed. And the third thing that it highlights is there is transformation through the struggle of life. Often when struggles come, people lean away. In this moment, he leans in harder in a wrestling match with the divine God. And it is a metaphor for Jacob's entire life, struggling for blessing and identity that maybe you and I can identify with quite well. This encounter leaves Jacob with a limp. If you read it for yourself, a physical reminder that he needs to depend on God. It also signifies that true strength and blessing come only from God, not from man or anything that this world offers, only through God. And through that personal effort to seek God, he is transformed in that moment and gains a blessing and an identity from the one who created him. So, the story of Jacob, birthright and blessing, both stolen from the flesh. Yes, prophetically spoken about over these two, but he still did it himself. Then he moves into a moment of actually wrestling with God and receiving a dream from him, knowing that God is with him. And then he moves into seeing his faith put on display to be reconciled with his brother. Then later on, helps us understand what true faith looks like. I'm praying and trusting that this short and powerful moment together will have us wanting and reading more and the entirety of Jacob's life story. It's had me wanting more, and it's actually moved me to understand that there are people, there are things, there are places that I need healing from and send healing to understand, to help me grow in my faith. Jacob, a flawed individual used by God, is described at the end of his life in Hebrews chapter 11, and it gives us a beautiful New Testament perspective. It says this again, by faith, Jacob, when dying, he's come to the end of his life. Blessed each of the sons of Joseph, which are part of the lineage of God's people. He then bows in worship over the head of his staff. This verse underscores Jacob's enduring faith despite his flawed beginnings. Jacob ends this life as a man of faith, marked by faith, known by faith, and blessing others of faith, passing on God's promise to the next generation. He did not keep it for himself like he did in the beginning of his life. In his final act of faith, Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which then would lead to the 12 tribes of Israel, which then would lead to the more of God's people coming together, and ultimately in the lineage of God's promise of his son sent from heaven, who is Jesus. And in this moment, he is ensuring the continuation of God's covenant promises. I am with you, the God Almighty. I will do all of these things that I say in you and through you, and I will not leave you because I have promised these things. And Jacob now is ensuring the continuation of those promises that are covenant vowed words from God as an act of blessing others on his deathbed, signifying Jacob's trust in God's faithfulness to fulfill his promises, not Jacob's will, but God's will, beyond Jacob's lifetime. The image of Jacob worshiping while leaning on his staff actually symbolizes the lifelong journey of faith marked by the dependence of God. A shepherd would be given a staff, and they would lean on that staff in the hot sun. They would correct sheep. They would follow, they would go reach the one that left the grouping. They would defend off animals and wild animals and all of these things. And here he is described of leaning on the staff that was sent from God. The position, the authority, the anointing. And here he was leaning on his staff in worship. His physical needs, leaning into the weakness of a man, reflects his spiritual strength. A life transformed by encounter after encounter with God. Finally, Jacob's story encourages us with this, and I'll leave it here with this. Trust in God's promises. Even when life circumstances come and there's uncertainty that we face and our own shortcomings, or we try to control our own lives, know that there is only a little control that we have, and the control that we desire to have is to call on the one who is God. May I call on you, God, for your promises in my life. The next is seek reconciliation. Just as Jacob sought out to make peace with his brother, we too can seek and mend broken relationships. And please trust me and hear my word here. You need to use discernment on where you actually go to seek healing. Don't just try to bust into someone's life and try to seek reconciliation. Prayerfully consider, who do I need to be reconciled with? By faith and the power of God. And the last is to embrace the journey of faith. This is what this series is all about. Embrace the journey of faith like these men and women did. No matter how imperfect our paths may be or our journey, like Jacob, we too can be marked by faith, growing in transformation and a deeper connection with God. Let us take heart in knowing that God's faithfulness transcends past all of our own failures. And as we continue to move in our own faith journeys and stories, may we, like Jacob, find ourselves leaning on God's strength, trusting in his promises, passing on a legacy of spiritual provision and value onto others, remembering God is not finished with us yet. Every day you lift your head off your pillow is a new day for bold faith, unwavering faith, to be then deposited and left a legacy into others. He is at work in all of us, even in the messiness of our lives, to bring out his perfect will for others to see his glory and wonder and awe. May this reflection today on Jacob's life inspire us to walk more closely with God and trust him more deeply and live out the faith that is bold, beautiful, and an anchor for us in all the storms that we face. May God bless you and guide you as you continue in your own faith story, in the one that is marked by unwavering faith. Peace and grace be with you. Amen.